Alright, what's up you guys? Ray here. I'm going to be building the game type that I talked about yesterday, Parkour, and it's about running really fast using the Spartan abilities to your maximum and trying to reach all the checkpoints before everybody else reaches the checkpoints. First thing we do is load up Forge and select a map. I am tied to Barrens nowadays. I used to use Breakout Arena because of the flat surface and not having to build the ground, and that was always great for testing and stuff. And then when prefabs came out, it was just wonderful. Um, I don't use Alpine or Glacier because I don't like having to deal with the terrain. I don't use Tidal or Parallax because I don't like having to build my own floor. I want as few pieces as possible to be able to deal with things and make things easier for me to do. And I don't use depths because the visual style is just not that great for testing for me. So I'm gonna load up Barrens. So the first thing I think about is what pieces need to be set up for this game type. And like what components, what kind of prefabs do I expect to build, what modular pieces. Um, there's going to be like every game type I'll build, there will be the game management system, things that initialize all the objects at the start and then spawn them all when the game starts, the actual round clock starts. And then there's also the checkpoints in parkour. Your goal as a player is to reach every checkpoint before every other player. And when you run through a checkpoint, the nav point should be disabled for you, and turn that off. So I delete all the objects so that way I don't have to deal with them. But when you go through a checkpoint, it should be scored and tracked that you've been to that checkpoint already and you can't go back through it. It should remove your waypoint. So scoring, waypoint, keep track that it's not there. But it shouldn't affect any other players. Other players should still be able to go through the checkpoint and they should still see a nav point on the checkpoint. So at the start, it's easy just to nav point everything for the player. And from there, we can have scripts that will track each individual player. And the reason I want to track each individual player is for that personalized, I've been through this checkpoint. It's not a global thing. If I go through the checkpoint, nobody else needs to know that. It's all about racing against the clock, racing against your teammates or your friends, and working from there. So the first thing I typically do is load up this prefab that I created. It's got a simple static spawn camera. I always end up merging it into the ground by accident. But it's got a static camera, a single respawn, and it's got a couple switches. So I'll go over these scripts real quick. So this on match start, it sends out the initialization message and it turns off the game. And I'll explain that in a second. This turns on the game at round start, and at round end, it turns off the game. So I'm using two main channels here. The initialization channel, which is India. This is a similar pattern that 343 used in King of the Hill. Initialization sends out and says, hey, objects, go get prepared for the game to start. And they do things like set default variables if they need to, they turn on and off power channels, they set up their children, they despawn, whatever they need to do. The game channel says, hey, the game's actually being played. And the game channel isn't on during the loadout camera. For instance, it only runs, it follows the round clock. And the reason that we use this game channel is so that way when we spawn something in, we can spawn timers in when that game is turned on, and the timers are based on when the game was turned on, not when match started. So it gives us more fine-grained control over what actually gets used on the map. And that also gives us the ability to test and forge. We can manually trigger turning on the game and turning off the game, rather than match start, which doesn't have a trigger for us. We can't we can't manually test that. And testing is such an important thing in the new scripting because there's so much that you can do, there's so much that can go wrong, and there's so much that can go right too. So we use these channels, this setup, to make things easier to test. So the first thing that I'm thinking about doing is so we need zones for checkpoints, but these zones need to keep track of every player. And when you have to keep track of every player, you have to know exactly which one is coming through your checkpoint at what time. And in order to do that, we have to label each player. Each player needs to be set as with an identifier, so that way we can say, okay, player 1 came through here, not player 3. So let's just mark down player 1. And if player 1 tries to come back through here, then we don't need to do anything. So that makes me think that we need to label every single player first, as the first thing we do at the beginning of the round. And to do that, players have player scoped variables. I'm not a fan of the player scoped variables, mainly because you can't use them in filters. But you can use spawn order, and you can use local object variables in filters. However, we've observed that player object variables, just the local variable, doesn't actually work on players. And if it does work, it's probably because it doesn't work when they're dead. That's possible too. So what I want to do is set a number for every single player in the game. So we will start that by saying we want to go from 1 to the number of players in the game and label each person that. And that's essentially a for loop. So we want to go on initialization. When we initialize, I want to start at 1, so I'm going to set this number to 1. So the object this, I'm going to set its number to 1. And that's going to trigger this script that says whenever your number is less than or equal to, because we want to go to the number. Let's do it, use a global channel for now. We'll use global pop-up for players. So what this will do is whenever your number is less than the number of players, which at initialization we start with 1, then we will find a player. We'll set the player spawn order of players add. We want to select all players with an order of 0 because they default to 0, and we want to select a random one of them. So one player that has 0, we're going to select one of them, which means 0 means that they haven't been touched yet. Because everybody defaults to 0, we need to grab somebody who hasn't been set yet. So we're setting things 1 to 16 potentially. So set your spawn order to the number of this. And just a note, when you're setting this object, it's kind of bugged. If you just hit object, it will actually default to team, like this team, I think, alpha. So I like to tap these both to make sure that they actively get set on as what they're supposed to. So we're going to change the spawn order of the player, of one random player. And then once we do that, we're going to increment this number. We're going to increment this number by 1. And what will happen is, as long as we're still below the number of players, when we change the number of this to 1, it's going to re-trigger this. And then when it re-triggers this, it will set the next one to 2, and then 3, and so on and so forth. So this will essentially for loop over every single player and label them as spawn order, whatever. And this will happen on initialization. But on initialization before that, we need to set the number of players. And I want to do that on the game manager. So on match start, before I send out the initialize message, I want to set a default on the player channel because I want it to be set before initialization. So just going to see, I still want to send alpha. I hate that I can't move these actions. It's really annoying. I just want to slide them down, but I can't. So what I'll end up having to do is I want to do a number change. I want to set Papa to I like to use object count for this. For every player in the game, we're going to set Papa to that. And then we're going to message send. Let's do power off first. I'm going to turn off the game. And then we're going to send a message of initialize. Okay, so by the time I initialize, my spawn order should be 1. And I want to make sure I test this. Place a terminal, add a script, do an interacted. So a good way to test numbers that we've used is using score change. And when you use score change, you have to select this team. And I want to set it to a game value of spawn order that's based on the activator. So whenever I hit this, it will change my score to whatever the activator, being the player is the one activating the action. I want to move this down just a tad. Okay, so the activator is whoever triggers the interacted condition. So activators and scripts are based on the conditions you do. If you read the text at the bottom, it says a player interacts with this object, switch or pickup, uses activator as the player that interacted with the object. So since I'll be the one interacting with the object, it will display my spawn order as team 1's score. And we always use team 1 in Forge because we default to red team. It's just easier that way. So right now, if I hit it, I'm actually set to 255. So what I want to do then is grab a spawn order. I can't grab a spawn order of 255. I wonder if this will work anyway. Let's try it. It doesn't work. So, what's the best way to do this then? So I want to on message chain set this to 1. So this will be set to 1 now. That's wonderful. I also want to add a script that when number check of this is equal to the Papa channel, player P. When it's equal to P, then we want to set the number on this to some arbitrary large number. Above the number of players, we'll just say 30. Why? Because 30 is above the number of players that can be in the game, so Papa will never be larger than that. So that way when we reinitialize, we will set this to, we'll set the number on this so it can re-trigger the loop every single time. So right now I'm just going to set it to 0, and that should trigger that. Oh, that's not an initialize message. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of the order check for now just to see if this works. The order filter. Instead, let's do a select random here. And see if we can just trigger it without worrying about an order check. Okay, so my number is 0. Oh, because, haha, I have to change this back to 1. So what I'm doing is hitting initialization, and that'll reinitialize the entire game state. And that object right there is setting my spawn order. So now my spawn order should be 1. Why is it not 1? 1. Or not. Oh, because its number is not equal to... Damn it. Okay, first thing, how do I reset this? Because I set it to 1 first, it's all wonky. So I'm going to set it to 37, not less than the number of players. And then I'm going to set it back to 1. Less number of players is being outputted weird. Oh, I have to hit this first, and then hit this. Okay, now we have to debug. So to debug, we will use score. So first thing I want to do is on initialization, let's make sure that we are setting the proper number. Number, score change, team, add this team, set it to whatever the player channel is. So I want to make sure the player channel is being set to 1 before I go any further. Do I have a score change here? Spawn order change. Oh, that's the score change. So if I hit this, theoretically we should be getting a... Oh, that's because that's on match start, and I can't re-trigger a match start. That makes more sense to me. Okay, so if I want to do an initialization message, I need to make sure the player count is set before actually sending that. Number change, object, set, constant of 1. I mean, for now, I can set the variable in here and just, because that number shouldn't change ever. So we'll set this to an object count of players with no offset. We can each calculate our own player count. That's not a problem. Then we'll do a number change, object this to 1. So let's do that. Alright, now my spawn order is 1. This, I can remove the score change, already did that. And I can remove this setting of the global channel. Everything's going to end up setting the Papa channel at this point, but that's fine. I'm not too concerned with that. I'm going to set this to none for now. So we turn off the game and then we send out an initialization message. And then on initialization, we set the pop-up channel, if it's not already set, to the object count of the number of players, and then we set our spawn order to 1. So we can do, so that way, excuse me, so that we can do testing on multiple things. Since I don't have multiple players in here, I'm going to instead set up a bunch of boxes that are labeled as players. Am I going boxes? 8 by 8. They're about the size of players. This is a player. This is also a player. And this. And this. And this. So we have 5 players. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what I want to do is going to label these as players for P. So all of these are now players. So instead of doing this, select random. And I'm going to use a label here. So grab all players randomly, 1, and then label their spawn order. So now what we want to assume is that each player's spawn order is 0. So that way we don't pick one that we've already picked before. So we noticed at the beginning we tested spawn order, and spawn order by default is 255. Mysterious number 255. We have no idea why it does that, but it does. But we want to select a spawn order of 0. If you have a 0, then we want to choose you, and we want to choose a random one of you. So this makes the assumption that at the beginning of the game, every player is labeled with a spawn order of 0, and also has a player label. So the thing is, I want the children to fire before this one, because players need to be set before this one. Set. So how would I want to trigger? So this is what I'll do. So on number change, whenever Papa is set, when it's greater than 0, so whenever the number of players is greater than 0, that's when I want to actually trigger this loop. That will work out much better. So then we'll have a different thing that says on initialization, do stuff. So this one will, on initialization, do wonderful things. So on initialization, we want to set all the players' orders to 1. So spawn order, that's at the end. Spawn order constant 1, this players. Okay, we're going to set all players to have a spawn order of 0. And actually, all players. Ooh, instead, let's do a label change. So we're going to add all players to, going to add a label of player to all players. This way I can use my testing objects. And then, once all players have been labeled, we will grab everything with the player label, and we will set it to spawn order 0. Okay, so the reason I do this, so first I want to add a player label to everybody, and every single player, because every single player needs to be labeled. The reason I do that instead of just doing add players is so that way I can test this logic. So right now, if we look, all of these boxes are set to spawn order 0. They're all set to be labeled, to be recognized as a player, so spawn order 0. So you'll see all of these are set to 0, and at the very beginning, when we initialize, I should remove these other two scripts. When we initialize, we will add the label of Papa to every single player, and we will change their spawn order to 0. And this puts us at a default state, and then after that, we also set the number of players. I already have another action. So number change, global, so we set the number of players in the game, and we set that to a object count of things with the player label. So that way, when I'm testing, at this case, it will grab me and the 5 boxes, but there will technically be 6 players, 5 boxes, and me, because I will also be labeled. And theoretically, I will get a spawn order, and each of the boxes will get a spawn order. If I send this message, and I hit this, I have a spawn order of 2. If you look in the bottom right, you'll see the score says 2. Because I hit this, I'm the activator, I have a spawn order of 2. If I check this box has a spawn order of 1. This one has a spawn order of 5. This has spawn order of 0, that's a problem. This has a spawn order of 4. This has a spawn order of 3. Is there a problem here? Okay, so it should be 1 through 6. Player Papa is greater than 0. Set the number of this to 1, so it does start at 1. And then, as long as it's less than or equal to Papa, Papa should be 6 because I should be labeled as a player. Spawn order set to this number, and then increment by 1. I like to turn all these off because I don't like random side effects that happen. Okay, and then when Papa equals, or when this number equals Papa, oh, not when it equals, when this is greater than. So this is what happened. So when it hit, it started off the sequence with 1. Went to 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. When it got to 6, this script triggered because it was still less than or equal to 6, the number of players. But then this condition also triggered because it was equal to 6, so then it set the number on this. This might have triggered before that. So it might have stopped the sequence or something. So I'm wondering if that's what it was, because we should all be labeled from 1 to 6. So if I hit this again, I reinitialize, and then I hit this for, now I'm at 0. Wait. Initialize. I shouldn't be at 0. And now everything's broken. What are the spawn orders for this? Spawn order 0. So we're at a complete default state now. Oh, what equal to this plus 1 equal to that. I think it might be re-triggering itself or something. Oh, now everything's broken. Okay, so where are we at? So when the number of Papa, oh, that's what I want. So what's not being reset is Papa. Papa is not re-triggering because Papa is set to 0 already. So if I want to completely reset Papa, first I'll set it to a constant of 0, and then I'll set Papa to the object count, because I want to re-trigger everything that's watching Papa, or the player channel. So I reset player, so I set it to 0 first. And then I want the number change check to be when it's greater than 0. So then I set it to the object count of everything with the player label. Player label. Okay. And this needs to change to greater than 0. Okay, that's already there. Now I re-hit this. No, it's not working. Okay. Now we have to start doing debugging. So this is our initialization system. This is our manager. So we set an object count of this. So let's go through our steps. When we hit initialize, we will add the player label to every player. We will change the spawn order of everything with a player label to 0. We will change Papa to 0 to reset it back to normal. And then we will set Papa to the number of players in the game. And then, when the number of players in the game is set to greater than 0, we will set the number on this to 1. And when this is less than or equal to Papa, we will set the spawn order of each object to whatever that number is, and then we will increment this by 1. And then when the offset, let's see, when we reach 6 plus 1, did I calculate this wrong? This should be minus 1. When we reach player number 6, we still want to set that number. So 5 is not equal to Papa. We want to end on the next one. Okay, that's probably what's wrong. If my logic is right. Haha! So now the player is 2. And then spawn order of this is 5. You should all have a number 1 through 6 now. That was 1. This is 3. This is 6. Ha, I win. This is 4. Ta-da! So now every single player is properly labeled. Yay! So now we have a working initializer. So I'm going to save this as spawn order serializer. Serializer as in, like, when we serialize something, we set its an ID for every single thing. So player spawn order. Now we'll just do spawn order serializer. There we go. So spawn order serializer is nicely set. So that works theoretically. So what's the number on this? This is 5. Theoretically, when I hit this, everything will get a new random number. I am now, well, still 2. This is 3 now. This is 6 now. So 3, 6, 5. Let's hit it again. I have a number of 5 now. That has a number of 1 now. Has a number of 4. So all of these should be completely working. So we have a test, and this system works. So what we just created was this manager here, which on India, it will add the label to all players. It will set everything labeled as 0, and it will set the global player channel to 0 first, and then re-trigger things by setting it to a number greater than 0, which is the number of players in the game. And then, when that number changes, when that number of player changes, this will re-trigger because it's greater than 0 now. It doesn't pay attention to when it's reset to 0, so that's very important, so it doesn't trigger this. And then when it's set to greater than 0, we change this number to 1. I actually want to, let me make this more efficient. Make this leaner. Set the object of this, increment by 1. No, set to 1. Is that what I have here? Set to 1. Okay, and then I'm going to remove the last one. Okay. So we set this to 1. When we set this to 1, that triggers our loop. And then when we are less than the number of players or equal to the number of players. So we're at 1, it's less than 6 players, so we go through this first. We hit the spawn order, and we grab everything with a player label. This filter system is really awesome. I love it. So we grab everything that's ever been labeled player. So now we have 6 objects in the list. We make sure that we only grab objects that have a 0 order. And then, so on the first run around, everything should have 0 because it's been reinitialized. So we grab a random one of those, and we set the number. So everything is initialized with a number. Then we have all this, and everything works, everything's happy. Okay, so this is how we serialize every single player in the game. Once we have that, then we have magical, wonderful things. I'm going to save this, and then we'll move on to the next component. So I'll come back to this later. But this works fine. This is everything we wanted it to do. I'll retest one more time, reinitialize. My spawn order is 2. This spawn order is 4. Always want to double check. 6, 3, 1, and 5. Yep, that looks right. So we saved, and then we'll leave. Now we've got our spawn order serializer. I think that's a good time for a break, so I'm gonna end the video and work on part 2, which will be, now that we can serialize all of our players, we will use that to create a zone for checkpoints. Alright, I'll be back in a bit, guys. I'll start a new video, and that video might be posted later. Who knows? We'll see.